Amen. One of the criticisms about the messages that we give is that it's very complicated and that there's a lot of information. And my response to that, depending on who is making that assertion, is that the Bible's a big book. And if everything was that straightforward, we wouldn't need, depending on what Bible kind of version you've got, 1,500 plus pages to describe the gospel message if it was that straightforward. So there are some complexities in the gospel message. Plus, this world is full of denominations, as we all know. You can go to any denomination to suit whatever doctrinal belief that you have. In fact, even within Adventism, there are many winds of doctrine, many beliefs that people have. So it really shouldn't come as a surprise to us that if you want to explain something, especially when people have preconceived ideas, it takes a bit of work, takes a bit of effort on my part as a speaker and your part as the recipient to get to grips with some of the complexities and issues that surround any subject. The added complication is that you may or may not be aware, but we're here for 6 days at this convocation, and some of you are only going to be here this Sabbath. And for those of you who are only going to be here this Sabbath, many of you didn't perhaps even know that there was a presentation this morning, an early morning presentation. So it's really difficult to integrate a group of people of this size dealing with messages that are relatively difficult to understand, and worse than that, are very controversial. All things being equal, we could just give you a couple of Bible verses, explain some dates, give you some Spirit of Prophecy quotes, and everybody would be happy and we'd all be on our way with the various truths that we teach. But life isn't that straightforward, and therefore it takes some effort to explain some things. And if you're going to tackle any subject, on these charts there are many prophecies that have been dealt with. Most of the chapters that have any prophetic significance in the book of Daniel are depicted on these charts. And if you want to tackle any chapter, say we're going to Daniel chapter 8, most of us think that you can just go into Daniel chapter 8, explain it, and everything's going to be straightforward. But often you need to go right back to the beginning, which would probably be Daniel chapter 1, if you think about it. Then you might look at Daniel chapter 2. But you can't isolate the book of Daniel. Most of us aren't really familiar with the history that created the book of Daniel. But if you are, you'll know that it's dealing with the church that's in apostasy, that's already begun to be taken down, dismantled, and taken into captivity by the Babylonian Empire. And if you know that much, which hopefully that you do, because it tells you in the first few verses of Daniel chapter 1, then you know that there are other prophets who are ministering at the same time as Daniel is, and then you have to factor those books in. So to understand the context of Daniel chapter 1, 2, 3, 7 or 8, you really need to have some working knowledge of the book of Ezekiel, the book of Jeremiah, and also the book of Isaiah. You know, the book of Isaiah is over 60 chapters, and it's a lot of information in there. So it's not that easy to just go into a subject and expect people to really understand what's going on and what's happening. Having said that, we're going to have a go to do that in the next 2 and a bit hours. So we've got an hour presentation now, an hour and 15 minutes perhaps. We're going to have a break for lunch, and I've got another presentation in the afternoon, and then we've got a question and answer immediately following that. So I'm hoping everybody's going to stay for lunch and you're going to stay for the afternoon, that I can get you enthused and interested enough to make it worth your while staying for this afternoon's presentation, which will just be a continuation of what we're discussing now. We've already covered a lot of material for those of us who have been here only one day, and we've still got another 4 days to go after today. But one of the things that we've already discussed is the everlasting gospel. So I've tried to explain conceptually what the everlasting gospel looks like, how it operates, and the dynamics of it as you and I interact with this everlasting gospel. The everlasting gospel has different terminology depending on who it's being delivered to. So if you're an ancient Israelite king, the everlasting gospel will be delivered in a specific way. If you're a New Testament apostle, it will be given in a different way. And if you're living at the end of the world, you have to deal with all of it, and that makes it quite difficult. In our church today, there's a struggle over the everlasting gospel, exactly about what it is, the dynamics of it, and the terminology that we're supposed to use when we discuss that subject. And I tried to explain over my last presentations yesterday that the everlasting gospel, its very purpose is to create two classes of people from one group. So today, there's about 20 plus people in this room, and if we all started our journey at the same moment, at the same time, if we could just pretend that that's where we are, we're all fresh, clean sheets of paper, we'd all be in the same situation. And then if we started dealing with the everlasting gospel, it would then begin to shape, affect, and mould us. And depending upon our response to that everlasting gospel, we would either fall away into perdition, or we'd rise higher and higher in our walk with Christ, eventually going to heaven. And that's the purpose of the everlasting gospel. It creates two classes of people, and we've discussed that. These two classes are brought to view over and over again in some places that you may not even think about. This morning's presentation, Brother Patrick spoke about the Exodus and Moses. I don't believe he went as far as going all the way to Kadesh Barnea, but you know, when they get to the borders of Canaan, they send out some spies. There are 12 spies, as you know, one for each tribe. But those 12 spies, they get divided into how many groups? Two groups. Because when they come back, there's 10 of them who are complaining, and there's 2 of them who are defending the cause of God. This symbology about 10 and 2 is something that we need to be familiar with, because it's a recurring theme in Bible prophecy. If we were to go to Daniel chapter 7, you would find right here, viewed pictorially in this depiction here, that there was a beast, an iron beast. Daniel chapter 7, it had 10 horns on its head. So as soon as you start dealing with these 10 horns, you know it has something to do with the story of Kadesh Barnea when these 10 spies come back. If we skipped over to the book of Revelation, Revelation 17, there's another beast. It's this one over here. This beast doesn't have one head, but it has 7 heads, but it too has 10 horns. And upon this beast, there's this woman riding, whose name is Mystery Babylon. So you get this recurring theme, this recurring idea, this recurring symbol of a number 10, and you get this recurring symbol of 2 as well. The reason why I mention that is unless it's brought to your attention that there are always 2 classes of people that are brought to view, those kind of stories that you are familiar with don't make any sense at a prophetic level. And I'm suggesting that the story of the Exodus is a prophetic subject, as Brother Patrick was delineating to you in his previous presentation, even though he didn't go all the way down, I believe, to Kadesh Barnea. But the whole story is dealing with God's people returning to what? Heavenly Canaan. We understand that. So if we were to believe that that story is dealing with heavenly Canaan, should we not expect all the details of that subject to have a bearing or an impact upon us at the end of the world? That story is about ancient Israel, and we're modern Israel. Ellen White uses that terminology. It's an inspired phrase, an inspired term, modern Israel or spiritual Israel. And so I'm suggesting if we can see that wilderness wandering and they're headed into Canaan has some kind of symbolic application at the end of the world, and it does, then perhaps we should reconsider and re-look at all the intricacies of that wilderness wandering. And one of the characteristics you're going to see is when those 12 spies go and they give their reports back, it's divided into these two groups. And the symbology about the 10 and the 2 is something that you and I need to understand. I also mentioned that there's a message. There's a message that's going to be given to God's people, which is the everlasting gospel. And this message creates these two classes. And I can't remember which sister it was. One of the sisters here yesterday said, oh, I think it may have been my brother. He said, you people are the troublers in Israel. Identifying that we're troublemakers. And there are two groups of troublemakers, or two people that I know that are identified as troublemakers. One of them was Paul. Paul was identified as a troublemaker. Wherever he goes, he turns the world upside down. Probably familiar with that. And the most famous or infamous troublemaker is Elijah. He causes trouble wherever he goes. We all know that. And we already know that in this trouble that Elijah is causing, he has someone who takes his name in the time of Christ. This is John the Baptist. John the Baptist is also identified as being Elijah, a troublemaker. And we as Adventists, I'm sure you've heard presentations on this subject, that we also are symbolically represented as Elijah, because the ultimate fulfillment, or the antitypical fulfillment of Elijah, is dealing with the person who ushers in the great and terrible day of the Lord. And what is the great and terrible day of the Lord? It's the Sunday law. The Sunday law that all of us understand, know about, talk about perhaps, have dreamt about, worry about, is a subject that Elijah's going to be dealing with. And what I'm suggesting is Elijah has a message, and the message that he has is a twofold message. It's a message of repentance, and it's also a cheering message that says if you repent, the Lord's will is going to be done and he will restore his people. Unfortunately, it's a recurring theme in Bible prophecy that the restoration of God's people doesn't happen en masse. Only a remnant are going to be saved. And this is such a recurring theme of prophecy that we understand at the end of the world that when God's people come to those final movements as they approach the day of the Lord, the vast majority of them are going to fall away, being taken captive by a foreign nation, often depicted by Babylon, and a remnant will be saved. That's what we're dealing with. Also, hopefully you'll remember, we spoke about the crux of this message, because someone said, you don't even tell us what the crux of the message is, and hopefully I did that yesterday. The crux of our message is this. I could put people on the spot, but I won't today because it's a Sabbath day. We're dealing with the everlasting gospel, and the everlasting gospel is a singular message that was given to Adam and has been running through history over the last 6,000 years, and it's the same message, that Jesus is going to save his people. But that message looks different terminology, different circumstances, the dynamics change as you go through history. And one of the questions that's always asked is, when is this Messiah that you keep on speaking about going to come? We know, hopefully, that Moses was the Messiah, and he was going to save his people. Then there was a prophecy that dealt with the return or the rising of this Messiah when Moses begins that work. The same thing happens with Christ. There's a gospel message that Christ is going to return. He's going to, think that's even technically correct. His first advent, he's going to come and save his people, and people want to know when that's going to happen. Then we can go to the Millerite history, which we're going to tackle in the next coming days in a lot of detail, about the gospel message of when that's going to happen, and it gets answered. So over and over again, the question that's asked is, when is this gospel message going to be fulfilled? And the question that's being asked today, we've been preaching about a Sunday law for over 170 years, and when is that Sunday law message going to be fulfilled? When's it going to happen? And we are saying categorically, the time has already arrived. The final moments have already begun, that we can now, with confidence, tell God's people that the Sunday law is imminent. We're not predicting a date per se. We don't understand the date. We're not dealing with time setting. But what we do understand is, by the events that are occurring, that we can now track very accurately that the Sunday law is about to hit this world. And not only are we dealing with the Sunday law, we're dealing with events that precede the Sunday law. Connected with the issue of the Sunday law is three subjects: the 25-20, the subject of the daily, and the third subject, Islam. These three subjects, the 25-20, the daily, and the role of radical Islam in Bible prophecy, are the only three subjects that are portrayed on these two charts that today the church struggles, and more than struggles, actually fights against. And it takes great lengths to do that. We put forth as a church, as a structure, quite a lot of effort and resources in dealing and showing God's people that these three prophecies, these three subjects, are erroneous. And on our part, people like myself spend a lot of time, energy and resources, even financial resources, to go around the churches, coming to meetings like this, putting on meetings like this, discussing these three subjects, and explaining why these are important subjects for us to understand at the end of the world, that they have relevance to you and I. And I explained yesterday, very briefly, without going into a lot of detail, that all of these have an impact on the issue of the Sabbath. And we're making the bold claim, and it is a bold claim, that if you reject one or all of these three messages, any one of them, you're going to fail the Sunday law Sabbath test at the end of the world, that all of us were created, designed and commissioned to resist. So a rejection of these truths will precipitate your fall at the Sunday law, when everything that you and I understand from the great controversy is going to happen. And none of us are going to escape this issue. Whether you're a child, a woman, a man, whether you're aged, everybody is involved in this controversy. No one can escape it. There are existential events that are occurring outside of your home, outside of your relationship between your husband, your wife, your children, your parents. You may live righteous lives. Everything may be functioning well in your family unit, but there are existential events that are occurring which are going to sweep away most of God's church, because they're not spending the time, making the effort to familiarize themselves with the controversy that's raging through Adventism. And not only that, the events that are now transpiring in the world. And when I mean the events, I'm talking about the work of radical Islam, which has been operating in an increasingly aggressive way for over the past decade. And we're predicting that this aggression by radical Islam is only going to escalate. And when it escalates, it's going to collapse the economy of not only the United States, but every major nation, or Western nation, in fact every nation of the world, especially your nation, or including your nation, should I say. So we're not going to pick on you specifically. I want to deal, we're going to not look at, actually go through our notes today, we're going to do a short break, and we're going to have a quick discussion, hour and a half is quick, on the 25-20. So I want to look at the 25-20. Perhaps the banner, I don't know why it has turned out to be such, but it's the banner that everybody focuses on in the church. People get disfellowshipped over this issue. People lose friends over this issue. I don't know why, but it elicits very strong emotions, the 25-20. So that's what we're going to look at. I want to warn you that there is a lot of information. Hopefully I'm going to make it as gentle as I can so that you can understand what the issue is, why it has any relevance to you, because most people think it has nothing to do with me. This information here on this chart, 25-20, 677, all the way to 1843, which goes right down to the bottom here, or the same numbers are produced here, 677 going all the way to 1844, the 25-20 is in here, has no relevancy to you because these charts were produced 150 plus years ago, and so what? So what? What difference does it make? But I could say that about anything. I mean, we could say that about anything in the scriptures, so what? It's only when these things begin to have an impact on your life that people can see the relevancy of things. So hopefully I want to show you today that the 25-20 is a subject, when you take the symbology that's connected to it, the implications that surround it, do affect your life and mine. There are many, many things to do with the 25-20 that we won't be discussing today. If you're willing or you're happy to come to some of the further presentations during the week, we can discuss even more, depending on how much time we've got. So this is only a cursory or introduction to the 25-20. The other thing I'm not going to be doing in this presentation is actually dealing with the arguments that people have against the 25-20. Some people have arguments against the 25-20. There aren't many of them. There's only probably 3, maybe 4. I don't think there are maybe even 4. At least not 4 sensible arguments. And we've got answers to all of those ones. But that wasn't my purpose to have some kind of debate. But we're having a question and answer in the afternoon. If people have questions, more than willing to field the questions. So, let's go to Isaiah chapter 7. Sorry, the only reason I'm smiling is I've had problems with my computer for a while, and it's just decided to do some kind of auto update.
Oh no.
And so
You don't like you, eh?
So
Them don't like you,
I'm
eh?
without my notes at the moment. So we're in Isaiah chapter 7.
Is this any good to you, the book?
No, because we're not going through our notes.
Okay, that's right. I did say that.
Now, remember I dealt with this subject of 10 and 2, these 12 spies that are divided into these 2 segments. Let's just do a quick line here. We're in the time of Moses. Hopefully everybody can see my writing. We're in the time of Moses, and Moses writes the first 5 books of the Bible, and this is where those 12 spies are. Moses dies, and Joshua takes his place. Come to the book of Joshua, and then after Joshua you get the time period of the judges. So here we're in the time period of the judges. And the last judge is Samuel. Up to this stage, Israel has been running as a militia, which means that if you want to defend your property against an invading army and you're a farmer, you have to bear arms and you have to go and fight them, you and your neighbours, because they don't have a standing army. And they're tired of this. They've been doing this for hundreds of years now, and they don't want to do this fighting for themselves business anymore. So they come up with a plan that they want to copy all the nations. They want a standing army, and with this standing army they want a king. So God's people now are going to be asking for a king, and God is going to comply with them and give them what they want. And the first king is King Saul, then King David, then King Solomon. So these are probably the three most famous kings that everybody knows about. Saul, David, Solomon. Solomon was a bad king. His apostasy is unbelievable when you actually go and see what he was doing and what kind of a person he was. He makes mistakes from the very beginning. He might be what you would call a spoilt child. He wasn't trained up very well, and as soon as he becomes king, he starts doing things wrong from the very beginning, and the Lord bears with this king for a long time. But he never learns his lesson, and even though he repents at the end of his life and he's forgiven, he's a saved person, the damage that he's created in the kingdom is so bad that the Lord has to sort this mess out. And the punishment that he's going to receive, when I say him, the nation, because of his sins, is that David's children are no longer going to sit on the throne of all of Israel, all the 12 tribes. So the nation is going to get split or rent into two. So the nation gets divided into two. And I know some people already know the answer, but for those of us who aren't familiar with this, you can guess what it's going to get split into. It's going to get split into 10 tribes and 2 tribes. It's going to get split into these 10 and 2. So that we don't get confused, Levi isn't in this group. The tribes of Levi are not counted as part of the heritage of the tribes of Israel. They're out of the plan, but you still have 10 tribes. The reason you can get 12 tribes. The reason you get 12 is because Joseph had 2 sons, and Joseph's inheritance is split between his 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, and so that's why you can make up these 12. So the nation gets split into 2, and they're discussed in these terms as the north and the south. These 2 are Judah and Benjamin. Benjamin is so small it's normally just considered as Judah. So you have Judah against the 10. And these 2 nations, the north and the south, are going to be running through history now until you get to the last king of each of those 2 nations. And they're going to be struggling and warring one against another from that time onward. So I'm just going to put this to intimate that there's an interaction between these 2 groups, and it's almost always negative. There's going to be war between them. They come to their last kings here because of apostasy, because of continued rebellion against God. This is going to be their last king, and the southern tribes, they go for 100+ years more, probably 200 years actually, and they're going to receive or get to their last king. I'm going to give you the names of the king because it's important to know this. His name is Hoshea, and his name is Zedekiah. So these are the names of the two last kings of these two nations. And we're in Isaiah 7, if you remember. Isaiah 7 is around here. This is Isaiah 7. So Isaiah 7 is dealing with the subject just before this king is going to come to its end, and quite a ways before you get to Zedekiah. If you read the book of Isaiah in its original context, not its future prophetic application or that context, what it's dealing with is the subject of the apostasy of the northern tribes as well as the apostasy of the southern tribes. It's going to be dealing with both groups of people. So let me just give you one verse, one chapter that deals with that. It's one that we've spoken about a few times now. This is Isaiah 28. So keep your finger in Isaiah 7, and we're just going to skip over to Isaiah 28. Now, if you were to read from Isaiah chapter 7 to Isaiah chapter 28, you would actually see that it's dealing essentially with a very short time period. It's just dealing with the history that's happening right here. In your review, all the way through from Isaiah chapter 7 all the way down to Isaiah 28 and even a little bit further on. So we're in Isaiah 28, and it's going to be really easy to see that Isaiah is dealing with both groups of people. Isaiah chapter 28 verse 1. It says, "Woe to the crown of pride, to the drunkards of Ephraim, whose glorious beauty is the fading flower, which are on the head of the flat valleys of them that are overcome with wine." This is where things get a little bit complicated, because I've labelled this as the northern tribes and this is the southern tribes, but they have different titles above and beyond the north and the south. So I'm going to give you that, but I'm just going to give you that. I'm not going to go and prove and defend it. So this is often identified as Israel, and this is Judah. So you've got this struggle between the north and the south, or Israel and Judah. But Israel is also identified by one of its tribes, which is Ephraim. Sometimes it's identified as Samaria, or what you might know as the Samaritans. So when you go into the Gospels and it deals with the Samaritans are the remnant of these 10 tribes. So this warfare goes on for hundreds of years afterwards. Because this is around 700 BC, and Christ comes around 31 AD, 27 to 31 AD. So it's over half a century. This struggle between these two groups is still going on. So that's who the Samaritans are. So the Samaritans, Israel, Ephraim, Samaria, they're all synonymous terms with these 10 groups, or 10 tribes. And this is Judah. So Isaiah is making a statement against whom? It says, "Woe to the crown of pride, to the drunkards of Ephraim." So who's he dealing with? He's dealing with this group here, isn't he? Okay. and he's going to condemn them, tell them what bad people they are. He's going to talk about what God would have done, what God wanted to do, how he wanted to save them, but nothing's going to happen because they're just not going to listen. So he deals with them, and then if we drop down, let's go to verse 14. We're in verse 14. 1:4. Verse 14. Wherefore, hear the word of the Lord, ye scornful men that rule this people, which is in Jerusalem. Okay, so now who's he dealing with? He's not dealing with these people up here who live in Samaria. He's dealing with the people who live in Jerusalem. And Jerusalem is here in the south, which is the city where David reigned, where Judah is. So you can see that he's going to deal with both classes of people, and he calls them the scornful men. These men who rule Jerusalem. So he's going to be dealing with both groups of people as he's going to give this message of condemnation to the 12 tribes. So let's go back to Isaiah chapter 7. We went to Isaiah 28 to show you that the theme of the book of Isaiah, in the setting that it was originally given in, is dealing with the apostasy that's going on in all 12 tribes. He's going to deal with both of them. The warning is, if you want to just give it in its really simple form, the encapsulation of the message is this: that you need to stop doing sin because destruction's about to occur. Now, in the midst of all of this, we come to Isaiah 7. Now, some of the kings that we're going to identify now, I'm sure you're not familiar with unless you've studied this material before. But one of the most famous kings that many of us have heard, because the children's stories deal with this, is just here. And this is Hezekiah. Everybody familiar with Hezekiah? Hezekiah is the king who got that wound on his leg, and then he gets healed miraculously by placing a poultice of figs on his legs. Everybody knows Hezekiah? Yeah? We're going to be dealing with Hezekiah's dad. So we're in Isaiah chapter 7. It says, "And it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah." So this king here, King Ahaz, is Hezekiah's dad. That's where we are in Isaiah 7. So in Isaiah 7, and it's Ahaz. In Isaiah 7, and we're dealing with King Ahaz, who is Hezekiah's father. Before we read it, let me tell you who the king is in the north. It's Pekah. His name is Pekah. So let's read this. "And it came to pass in the days of Ahaz, the son of Jotham, the son of Uzziah, king of Judah." So here we are. Ahaz, the king of Judah, is in Jerusalem. He's Hezekiah's dad. "That Rezin, the king of Syria." Okay, so now we've got Rezin. I'm going to put him up here. And who is Rezin?
Syria.
He's the king of Syria. That Rezin, the king of Syria, and Pekah, so here's Pekah, the son of Remaliah, king of Israel, went up toward Jerusalem to war against it, but could not prevail against it. So this gives you the backdrop. There's a civil war going on between these two groups. Here's this war, and it's a civil war. You will understand what a civil war is? When two brothers, two families, a group of people in a singular country begin to fight one against another. So, some people think we've got civil war in our church between the conservatives and the liberals. And I don't think that's true. I actually don't think it's true. But there's this civil war that's going on here between Pekah and Ahaz. And Pekah has got some help. He's got some help from Rezin, who's the king of Syria. And Syria is not part of God's people. It's a different nation. And this nation, I'm not very good at map drawing, but here's a coastal line, north to south. It kind of sweeps around like this, and you end up coming, this is North Africa, and this is Egypt here, and this is Israel. And this is the River Jordan with two seas. Sea of Galilee and the Salt Sea or the Dead Sea. So Israel's here, and this is the Mediterranean, and just here is Syria. And just for context, Babylon's over here. So that's my. If you've got a map in the back of your Bible, you'll see it's not overly accurate, but I think it sort of gives you an idea of what's going on. So here we have Syria, who's towards the north, and they've gone into some kind of alliance with Pekah, who's the king of the northern tribes, and they're going to come and make war against Ahaz. This war actually has been going on for a time. It's been going on for quite a while. Israel here is divided into two segments. The north, which is 10, and the south, which is 2. We're going to give the year when this is happening. This is the year 742 BC. Has everybody heard of Usher? Usher lived in, I think it was the 16th century. He was a bishop who lived in Northern Ireland, part of the UK, and he was an avid historian. He travelled everywhere collecting documents and books, and collected one of the most comprehensive chronologies that has ever been produced. And it's over 400 years old, and it's still considered one of the best chronologies. He had some inaccuracies in it, some refinement that's happened, but mostly the dates that he came up with have been verified to be correct. And one of the dates that he identifies clearly is in Isaiah 7, when this event's going on. It's the year 742 BC. So you can find that online, or you go to Usher, and he explains that it's 742 when this event's happening. So, so did you get what I'm talking about? This is the 2520 we're dealing with. This is the subject of the 2520. You need to understand a bit of the background that's going on to understand what the 2520 is dealing with and the impact that it's going to have upon yourself and myself. Hopefully everybody's okay at this stage. I just want to come over here because I want to explain something as an aside. So this is my aside. And what I want to say is this. A symbol can have more than one meaning. A symbol can have more than one meaning. And there are many, many examples in the scriptures that address this issue. I already alluded to this earlier. When we pick up the number 10, What was the first example I gave for the number 10? The spies, remember?
Yeah.
Spoke about those 10 spies. And what was the second one I gave? The horns of Daniel 7? Yeah? What other one did we come up with? What other 10? The 10 tribes? Good. This is the 10 tribes. Another one? Right? Revelation 17. This would be the horns of Revelation 17. This one on the chart.
10 brothers.
Right?
10 brothers of Jacob and then the 2 to Rachel.
We didn't even do that one. 10 brothers.
That's good.
Very good. And that's correct. It's a correct application. And these toes of the statue in Daniel 2. So you have the 10 toes. Daniel 2. There are a few others. So all I'm trying to say is that 10 can mean different things. What group were these spies from? This was Israel. I'll put Israel for here. I for Israel. Daniel 7. These 10 horns here, it says pagan Rome. So you know that's pagan Rome. But I'm going to put the word Babylon to identify that one. The 10 tribes are Israel. The horns of Revelation 17 are certainly related to Babylon. The 10 brothers are Israel. And the toes are Babylon. Because they're dealing with these nations that are all part of the world. So that was a nice pattern there. Unintentional. But you've got 3 Israel and 3 Babylon. So how do you know which one in any story that you're going to deal with? You have to read the context. So we understand that you have to read the context to know what that symbology is dealing with. Everybody okay with that? I hope that's relatively straightforward. The complexity is this. We're dealing with a story here, and which one of them is it here that we're dealing with? Which number? 1, 2, 3, 4, or up to 6? Which symbol are we dealing with?
It's the tribes.
Yeah, which number would that be?
10.
Number 3? Yeah, draw 10. The first, second, third, fourth, fifth. It's the third one, isn't it? We're dealing with this one here, yeah?
Yeah.
And this is this is a literal story. So in the literal story, and we literally read Isaiah 28, literally it's dealing with, it said, the drunkards of Ephraim and the scornful men of Jerusalem. So literally it's dealing with 10 little tribes, Israel, and 2 southern tribes from Judah. So that's the literal application. But in this story, you can also make a prophetic application. You can make a prophetic application, and I want to show you how you go about doing that. Let's go to this one here, the spies. So the spies is a story about 10 men who are going to make war or argue or fight against 2 men. This is Joshua and Caleb. And these are the spies. And this gets so bad, what do the people want to do? They actually want to kill them. That sounds like civil war in the church. It gets so bad, they actually want to kill them. So when you see this 10 and the 2, what is this a story of? Who are the good guys and who are the bad ones? The 2 are the good guys.
Yeah.
They're good, and these are bad. So the symbology of this story is that the 10 is a symbol of bad and the 2 is a symbol of good. Now Joshua and Caleb may or may not have been perfect people, but they are a symbol of perfection, a symbol of good, because you're either good or you're bad. You're either righteous or unrighteous, you're either sinning or not sinning. But we're not taking that literally. Okay, so now let's do the tribes. So here you've got 10 tribes, and they're making war with the 2 tribes. And again, it's the story of these people are bad, these people are good. Even though they're not totally righteous people. Ahaz is not a righteous man in and of himself. But it becomes a symbol. So what we want to see, we've got 2 testimonies so far. We've got, let's do this one then. We've done the spies, we've done the tribes. Let's do the brothers. We'll do the brothers. So the brothers, you've got 10 brothers coming against 2 of them. And even though I put 2 here, remember they're going to actually come against one of the brothers, Joshua, because the other one isn't really going to get dealt with. But you still have these 10 who are going to make a war or a struggle against the 2. So you see that this 10 becomes a symbol of something that's bad. Each of these 3 examples that I've given are all dealing in the church. But we could go to the issue of the toes. Let's just quickly do the toes with Daniel chapter 2. So here you've got 10 toes. And in real life, who are the 10 toes? I mean, in real life. I'm not looking for the names. This is simple.
Kingdoms.
Kingdoms. So these 10 toes are kingdoms. Excellent. So, and they're kingdoms in what part of the world?
Europe.
Europe. This is Europe. I'll put out here, European. These are European kingdoms that we're dealing with. And the time period that this is addressing, I'm not asking when the 10 toes are created and all the preamble, but these 10 toes are going to begin to do a work beginning from the year 538, ending in the year 1798. And this is the 1260 years of the Dark Ages. I fully appreciate, as depicted in this diagram here, that 3 of those horns are going to be plucked up and you only get 7, but we're still dealing with this symbology of 10. Now, why is it called the Dark Ages? Because it's
No light.
there's no light, there's spiritual darkness,
Yeah.
but it's also identified not only as the Dark Ages, but secularly it's the Inquisition. So here's the Inquisition, and the Inquisition is basically torture. Who's doing all the torturing?
Papacy.
Okay, so that was a trick question, because the papacy doesn't actually do any torturing.
Yeah, it's the secular power.
The people who do all the torturing are the toes. It's the nations that do the torturing, but who tells them to do the torturing? That's the papacy. The papacy says, can you go and do a bit of torturing? And they say, sure we will, because we like you. So these 10 toes are these European nations that are going to be persecuting whom? God's people. And God's people are being symbolised when we follow through with this. I'm going to follow it through as we go to the end. You're going to be seen it's symbolised by this number 2 here. So here you've got 10 toes who are now going to make war against this 2. It's not 2 brothers, 2 tribes. This becomes a symbol of God's people, but you still have these 10 toes. And if we went to Revelation 17 here, I mean this one's relatively easy. Who's sitting on the beast? Or the woman. That woman is a representation of the papal church. And the 10 horns are on the beast, so you know that there's a relationship between the beast, its horns, and the woman. Sounds pretty much what this was. So again you've got the 10 and the 2. And this representation of these nations of the world, these 10, are almost certainly going to do something against God's people. In fact, they are. I say almost certainly. We know that they are. So what I want to show you is that when you summarise all of that, the conclusion of the matter is this. 10 equals what? What is 10 a symbol of?
Bad.
Power.
Bad. 10 is a symbol of something that's bad. And that bad can be God's people, or it can be Babylon or the nations of the world. It doesn't matter because they're both bad. So we want to take the lowest common denominator, which is bad. So when we come to this story here, we want to understand first the literal. What's the literal story here? That you've got civil war between the 10 tribes and the 2 tribes. But we also want to understand not only the literal history, but what that history is prefiguring. Pekah is the king of the 10, but Pekah is also, I'll put it small, is also the king of 1, which is his own tribe.
Okay.
So you've got Pekah, he's a man on his own, because he owns one of the tribes, and then you've got Pekah, he runs everything, and you've got Rezin, who's the king of Syria. We just read verse 1. We're going to read the rest of the verses, but I want to go down to verse 5, because verse 5 is going to make this point. Because Syria, who's Syria? Rezin. Ephraim. Okay, so here's Ephraim here. Ephraim is Israel, and how many tribes is Israel?
10.
10. So here's Ephraim. So we've got 1, Syria. We're in verse 5. 2 is who? Who's number 2 in the verse? In verse 2. Because Syria, then Ephraim, and then it's the third one. It says, and the son of Remaliah. Who's the son of Remaliah in verse 1? Pekah. Have taken evil counsel against thee. So how many people are listed? 3. It says Syria, Ephraim, and Pekah.
Right.
Can we see that in the verse?
Yes.
Rezin, Ephraim, and Pekah. 3. And what it's doing is identifying Pekah on his own. But Pekah is also king of Ephraim. Why would the Bible do that? Why would it separate the king from the 10? It doesn't make any sense. Until you know why. Until you know the answer why.
Unless there's the history behind it.
So it has some kind of meaning. And so that's what we're going to see. So here you've got 1, 2, 3. And what I really want us to understand, the relationship of Pekah. So Pekah's on his own, individual, but he's also part of the 10.
Yes.
So you could say there was a 9 and a 1, or there's a 10 and he's on his own. So I want us to, however you're going to conceptualize that, I want us to see that relationship. But the Bible's making it clear that you have to think of these as 3 separate things. Let's drop back to verse 2. And it was told the house of David, saying, Syria is confederate with Ephraim. What does it mean to be confederate?
In league with
Yes.
League. So there's a league, there's an alliance. So it says here, it was told to the house of David, saying that Syria is confederate with Ephraim. So here we go. This one and this one are confederate. These 2 groups are confederate. And we said confederate means what? An alliance. And his heart was moved. Who is the his when it says his heart was moved?
Pekah.
Ahaz. Who said
Oh, okay. I did. Yeah. So,
And it was told the house of David, saying, Syria is confederate with Ephraim, and Ahaz's heart was moved, and the heart of his people as the trees of the wood are moved with the wind. So that means Ahaz is scared.
Yeah.
Ahaz is scared.
What verse is that?
Verse 2. Ahaz is scared because Syria and Ephraim are in confederacy and they're going to come and make war with him. Verse 3. Then said the Lord unto Isaiah, Go forth now to meet Ahaz, thou and Shejashab thy son, at the end of the conduit in the upper pool of the highway of the fuller's field. Verse 4. And say unto him, Take heed and be quiet, fear not, neither be faint-hearted, for the 2 tails of these smoking firebrands, for the fierce anger of Rezin with Syria and the son of Remaliah. So now it's talking about the two kings, Rezin and Pekah, and he's going to explain why. Verse 5, because Syria, Ephraim, and the son of Remaliah have taken evil counsel against thee. So this threefold union here, there's 1, 2, 3, all coming together, and now they've taken evil counsel to do what? To come and destroy Ahaz and his nation. And Ahaz is a symbol of this 2, all the way 2, and 2 is a symbol of what? Good. So here's these good people, and these 3 are going to come and make war with them. Verse 6, and this is what they're saying: let us go up against Judah and vex it, and let us make a breach therein for us, and set a king in the midst of it, even the son of Tabeel. Thus saith the Lord God. This is God's response. It shall not stand, neither shall it come to pass. Is it going to work out?
No.
It's not going to happen. For the head of Syria is Damascus, and the head of Damascus is Rezin, and within 65 years shall Ephraim be broken, that it be not a people. And we'll read on, but we're just going to stop there. So what is 65 years?
65.
A score is 20, and 3 score is 3 times 20 is 60, plus 5 is 65. So it says within 65 years, what's going to happen?
They're going to be broken.
Within 65 years,
There'll be no
Ephraim
more
shall be
people.
broken, and they're not going to be a people. So there's a prophecy here, and we're in the year 742, and we're going to go forward 65 years, and it says by the time you've come to 65 years, what's going to happen? Ephraim is gone. No more. Ephraim is lost. It gets a bit hard to write that low. Not only is Ephraim gone, but who else has gone? Syria.
Yeah.
Syria's gone as well. So there's this 65-year time prophecy that's connected to this, the verses in chapter 7, and this is in the year 742 BC. And this is the introduction to the 2520. Now we're going to start coming into the 2520. We began our story here in the year 742 BC, and now we've got this prophecy that's going to help us to determine the start of this 2520. So before we come to the intricacies of the 2520, I just want to come and just deal with this in a little bit more detail. Remember, we had all of these tens up here, and we're saying that this was a literal story, and if I went to this one here, the one that's next to it, it says Revelation 17. We haven't even read the verses yet. Down here it says there is these 10 horns. Now a horn's literal.
Symbolic.
They're symbolic. You know, there's no 10 horns at the end of the world who are going around doing something. Okay, this is symbolic. So here's literal and here's symbolic. And what we're supposed to be doing is the following. Hold those thoughts. Let's go to the story of Noah. We don't have to turn there because we all know the story. The story of Noah. The story of Noah is about a boat. Was that a literal boat?
Yes.
And it has animals getting onto the boat. Were they literal animals?
Yes.
Okay. Now Jesus says, as it was in the days of Noah, so it's going to be at the end of the world. So at the end of the world, are we going to build a boat?
No.
No. Animals going to get onto that boat that we're not even going to build?
No.
No. So what do we do with the story of Noah as Adventists? What we do, we say this. We say, what the story of Noah means is that there's going to be people who are marrying and divorcing and getting remarried illegally, and people are going to have a lot of food because there's going to be lots of feasting and marrying and enjoyment. That's what it means. That's all that Jesus ever meant in that story. And if that's all it ever meant, why all that information and detail? so that what we could do is write children's storybooks, and do coal portering and make lots of money. Is that the reason why we've got all these intricacies, all these details? That's not, obviously. There must be some reason why it's given all this information. So you get some Adventist speakers who say, I know what it is. The ark was the safety of Noah. So at the end of the world, we need to have some safety. We need to have something that's going to keep us safe. So we're going to spiritualize the ark and say the ark is our character. So you need to build a character that's going to make you secure through the end times. And is that a good or a bad application? It's a good application. It's a good application. The safety is your character that you develop. I wouldn't use the word character. I'd use the word seal. Because as soon as you start using the word seal, then you've actually got inspired proof to show you that the ark at the end of the world is this seal that will keep you safe. You can then prove it to be that, instead of saying it in some generic sense. So, we've dealt with the ark. We haven't dealt with the size of the ark and how long it took and all the intricacies of the ark. There's lots of things about the ark that we could deal with. Hold the thought about Noah. Here we are. If you're familiar with Daniel 7, this is Daniel 7. There's a lion, there's a bear, and there's a leopard, and then there's this iron beast. So, who is this leopard representing? Does everybody know it's Greece? Do we know that the lion here is Babylon? Some people are not aware of that? We'll go to Daniel 8. Daniel 8, you don't have to guess. I'll show you the verse that says it in Daniel 8. We're in Daniel 8. If you look on that chart, Daniel 8 is this story here now. This is Daniel 8. That was Daniel 7, Daniel 8. So in Daniel chapter 8, and if you had a Bible like mine, it's got nice pictures in it, so I can just say, don't worry about the verses, look at the picture. But it says in verse 4, there's a ram. Actually, we'll go to verse 3. Then I lifted up my eyes and saw, behold, there stood before the river a ram. There's this ram that's been brought to view in Daniel chapter 8. And my question is, who is the ram? Don't answer, because the Bible's going to tell us. Let's drop down to verse 20. You don't have to guess on this one. Verse 20 says what? The ram which thou sawest having 2 horns are the kings of Media and Persia. Then if we drop down, it says, verse 5, go back to verse 5. And as I was considering the ram, behold, it doesn't say ram, but it says considering, behold, an he-goat came from the west. So there's a goat that's brought to view. Who's the goat? Drop down to verse 21, it tells you who the goat is, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia. So it tells you that this ram is Media Persia, and this goat is Greece. And it actually tells you on the chart, Media Persia and Greece. So you've got this bear is the ram, and the leopard is the goat. So the reason why we did that, in the Bible, an animal, what does an animal equal? Kingdom. So if I said a lion, what does a lion represent?
Judah.
Judah is a kingdom. Satan, Christ. So all I want us to see is that an animal doesn't represent an animal. Peter didn't understand this problem either. Now God's people don't understand about Bible prophecy. So when the Lord wants to teach Peter a lesson, he gets this sheet from heaven with all these animals on it. He drops it down and he says, there you go, Peter. And Peter says, I don't understand what this is talking about because I'm not allowed to eat unclean food. And was God dealing with unclean food? No. When he had these animals on there?
Yeah.
What's he saying the animals are? It says the people, they're Gentiles. So animals represent, I'm gonna drop all of this and call it people. So animals equal people. So now I've given you the answer. Let's go to the book of Genesis. Don't go to the book of Genesis. Story of Noah in the book of Genesis. Those animals that are getting on the ark, what do those animals represent? People. So there's animals are people. So, we're adults. Paul says, when I was a child, I behaved and thought as a child, but when I became a man, I did what? I put away my children's storybooks. And we started reading the Bible in an intelligent and adult fashion. And I don't mean that to insult people. I really don't. That wasn't my intention to do that. But I'm just showing you how so many of us are still reading the Bible as though it's a children's storybook.
Yeah.
So when you come to the story of Noah, you know that those animals are not dealing with real animals at the end of the world, because it's a prophetic story. And how many types of animals were there? They came in two groups,
Yeah.
clean
Clean
and unclean. And who's unclean according to God when he drops the sheep down to Peter? Who's unclean? Gentiles.
Yeah.
And who's the Gentile at the end of the world?
Yeah.
Someone who's not a Seventh-day Adventist.
Yes.
And who's clean?
17.
Seventh-day Adventist. The Bible tells us, Revelation 17, it says, these are virgins, and the definition of a virgin is someone who hasn't done what? Slept with a man and defiled herself. So there's this woman who hasn't defiled herself because she's a virgin. She hasn't slept with anybody. Still pure and innocent. It's a symbol of who? Those clean animals that are getting on the ark must be a symbol of God's people. So whatever way you think about who the 144,000 are, you know, using the definition that we've just got from the story of Noah, that it must be someone who comes from Adventism. The 144,000 who are the only virgins that are around in that story, Revelation 7, has to be Adventist. Can't be people from the world, because people from the world have already slept with somebody. This is symbolic. We're going to say this is symbolic, yeah?
Yes.
Don't misunderstand me. Because they slept. Let's go back to Isaiah 7. Who have they slept with in Isaiah 7? With Syria. They've slept with the Syrians. Now if you go back into Old Testament prophecy, this is the accusation that Christ, that God, makes against his people all the time. You keep on sleeping with them. It needs to stop. So, let's come back to our story. We've dealt with this issue of literal and symbolic. And we know that a horn isn't real. It has to be a symbol. And it's a symbol of something that's bad. It's these bad things that happen at the end of the world. Because Revelation 17 is about end of the world prophecy. However you want to look at it, it's dealing with that. So, we're going to make a break now for lunch. I'm not going to rub anything out. What we're going to deal with, if you're willing to stay after lunch, is we're going to look at this literal story and we're going to make a prophetic application about it, and we're going to see that the beginning of the 2520, this is the beginning of the 2520, the beginning of the 2520 is going to teach you something about what's happening in God's church. And if you don't understand the beginning, you're not going to understand the end. You know, there are certain characteristics about God that as Adventists we're just clueless about. We think that the characteristics of God is a God of love. But we claim to uphold the Ten Commandments. And if you go to the Ten Commandments, the overarching characteristics of God is not one of love, it's one of jealousy. He says, I am a jealous God. He defines who he is in the Ten Commandments. He's a jealous God. Another identifying feature of this God, and Brother Patrick took you there, he actually didn't because it was, I think, 4 chapters. 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 chapters if you include everything. Isaiah 42 to Isaiah 46. He said, read those chapters because it tells you another characteristics of God. And this characteristic of God is that he's the God of the beginning and the end. And what that means is if you want to know what's going to happen at the end, we're living here. If you want to know and you're looking here, what's happening at the end, that's prophecy. If you want to know what's going to happen at the end, which is prophecy, what do you have to do? You have to look at the beginning. And that's counterintuitive. And as Adventists, we're not taught to do that. We're not taught to look back to understand what's about to happen. And that is one of the key principles that we teach, which is why we labour the point, which is why it takes so long, because it's counterintuitive and we're not used to doing it. We think, if you want to understand end-time prophecy, read the Great Controversy, because it's all pointing to the future. But if you read the Great Controversy, 2/3 of that is all what?
History.
History. And why on earth would Ellen White waste her time putting 2/3 of a book that's all to do with history if it hasn't got anything to do with the end or prophecy? So we should really think about that, and 2/3 may be undercounted, it may be even much more than 2/3. So God says He's the God that shows you the end by the beginning. Another expression that's given in the book of Revelation is that Christ is the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end. And if you want to know what happens at the end, all you need to do is go back to the beginning. That's what we're going to do. We're going to pick up this principle. We're going to see what happened at the beginning, because that's going to teach us what happens at the end. This is the end of Adventism. At the end of Adventism, you're going to have Rezin, Ephraim, and Pekah coming to make war with Judah. And we want to understand the dynamics of that story so we can see what's about to happen at the end of the world. And if you don't believe any of this has got anything to do with the 2520, hopefully we're going to correct that in our next presentation. Let's pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your watch care and your loving kindness for your people. Lord, as we see prophecy being filled before our very eyes today, so many of us don't understand what's actually happening. We look into the world and we see it's collapsing, but many of us can't make any sense of these things. We go on the internet, we read books, we watch presentations, we go to our various churches seeking for answers. Many of our young people, Lord, are disillusioned. They see unfaithfulness in the church. They see directionless sermons. So many things have gone wrong, Father. But we thank you that it's through the fulfillment and understanding of prophecy that we can regain our bearings. We can begin to understand who we are as a people. And more than that, Father, we can understand what kind of a God we serve. Help us to develop this relationship with you, Lord, so that we would be able to trust so much in your word that we'd be willing to let go of the world and take hold upon Jesus, that we might receive salvation. This is our prayer on this Holy Sabbath. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.